The day my mother called me a disappointment, I was standing in the middle of a forward operating base in eastern Syria, sand caked into every crease of my uniform. A sat phone pressed so hard against my ear I could feel my pulse in my jaw. She wasn't calling to check if I was alive. She was calling because the rent check had bounced. "Rebecca, I don't know what kind of game you're playing," she said, her voice dripping with that particular brand of cold that only mothers can manufacture. "But your father and I are absolutely mortified. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is for us? I want you to understand something before I go any further, friends. I had been awake for 31 hours. I had spent the previous afternoon helping pull two of my guys out of a drainage ditch after an IED hit our convoy. My left arm was wrapped in field dressing from a laceration I hadn't even had time to report yet, and I was standing there apologizing to my mother because a wire transfer had been delayed by 48 hours. That's the part of this story I need you to really sit with, because without understanding that moment, none of the rest of it makes sense. My name is Rebecca Calloway. I'm 27 years old. I'm a first lieutenant in the United States Army. And for 5 years, I made myself smaller and smaller so that the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally could feel bigger. Growing up, I was the invisible one. My younger sister, Amber, was the one who mattered. Amber had the big personality, the beauty pageant smile, the social media presence that my parents treated like a second career. They drove 4 hours to watch her compete in regional modeling competitions. They took out a second line of credit to fund her fashion portfolio shoots. They talked about her at every dinner table, every family gathering, every phone call with relatives, like she was the sun and the rest of us were just orbiting her. I was the one who got straight A's and heard, "That's great, honey, but did you hear Amber got picked up by that agency in Nashville?" I was the one who made varsity track and heard, "That's wonderful, but Amber's photographer said she has the bone structure of a young Christy Brinkley." I enlisted at 18 because I needed to prove something. Not to them, I understand that now, but to myself. I needed to know what I was made of when there was no one cheering for me. The Army gave me that. The Army gave me sisters and brothers who had my back in the most literal way possible. People who would crawl through fire for me and expected nothing in return except that I'd crawl through fire for them too. But I was 20 years old when I got my first real deployment paycheck, and I was still so desperate for my parents to see me, really see me, that I made the worst financial decision of my life. I called home and told them I wanted to help. That was the word I used. Help. Within 3 months, it wasn't help anymore. It was an expectation. Within 6 months, my mother had set up a direct transfer she referred to as our arrangement. My father, who had managed to get himself laid off from his regional sales job, started calling my hazard pay the family fund. By year 2, Amber was driving a car that my combat pay had financed, and none of them had said thank you even once. The justifications they gave me were extraordinary, friends. Really, I want you to hear these, because you will not believe the things people will say when they've decided your sacrifice is owed to them. "Rebecca, the Army feeds you and clothes you and houses you for free, so what exactly do you need money for out there in the dirt?" That was my father, word for word, on a call during my second deployment. "You chose this life," my mother told me once. "You chose to go play soldier. The least you can do is make sure your family doesn't suffer for your choices." And Amber's sweet, self-absorbed Amber once texted me, and I am not making this up, "Can you bump up the transfer this month? I need a new camera lens for my brand content. You don't really have anything to spend money on over there anyway, right?" I want to be honest with you, because I think honesty is the only thing that makes this story worth anything. The reason I kept sending that money, and I kept sending it for nearly 5 years, was not because I was stupid. It was because I had been trained since childhood to believe that their comfort was more important than my dignity. That love was something you earned by making yourself useful. That the moment I stopped being financially valuable to them, I would become fully invisible. The fear of that invisibility was stronger than my common sense for a very long time. It took a roadside bomb, a 3-week hospital stay at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany, and a phone call from my Aunt Diane to finally break the spell. Aunt Diane is my mother's older sister, and she is everything my mother is not. She drove to the airport the day I left for basic training, and stood at the departure gate holding a handmade sign that said, "Bravest person I know." She sent me care packages every 6 weeks without fail, real ones, with beef jerky and crossword puzzle books, and little handwritten notes on index cards. She called on my birthday at exactly 6:47 a.m. every single year because that's the minute I was born, and she was in the waiting room when it happened, and she has never once forgotten. When I was lying in that hospital bed in Germany, my left leg in a brace, two cracked ribs, a concussion that made the fluorescent lights feel like ice picks, my phone had 11 messages. One was from Aunt Diane, who had somehow gotten the number for the ward and left a 4-minute voicemail that I have saved and listened to probably 200 times. The other 10 were from my mother, all variations of the same theme. The wire transfer hadn't gone through. Did I know when it would be processed? This was very inconvenient. That was the moment, friends, right there in that hospital bed. That was when something inside me went very quiet and very clear. I called Aunt Diane back first. Over the following weeks, while I was recovering, she and I talked every day. She knew more about my situation than I'd ever told her. She'd been watching from a distance for years, worried, not wanting to interfere with family. She said something to me during one of those calls that I come back to constantly. She said, "Rebecca, you've been so busy trying to earn love from people who already decided you didn't deserve it for free. That's not a debt you can ever pay off, sweetheart, because they keep moving the goalpost." She was right. I knew she was right, and I started making a plan. I want to be clear about something. I did not cut my family off in anger. I did not blow up. I did not send a long, dramatic email or make a scene. What I did was quieter and, I think, more permanent. I contacted my bank and restructured every automatic transfer. I redirected my financial accounts to a new bank entirely, one my family had no information about. I did this methodically, over about 6 weeks, the same way I'd plan any operation with patience and precision and zero room for error. By the time I was cleared to return to active duty, I was financially untethered from them for the first time in 5 years. They didn't notice for almost 2 months. That tells you everything you need to know about how closely they were actually paying attention to me versus the money. When they finally noticed when the transfers stopped appearing, my mother called 17 times in one evening. I let everyone go to voicemail. My father emailed with a subject line that read, "Extremely disappointed," which I thought was almost funny given the circumstances. Amber posted a vague, passive-aggressive Instagram story about people who forget where they came from, that her followers definitely didn't understand, but that I understood perfectly. I didn't respond to any of it. Here is what none of them knew. In 4 months, I was going to be awarded the Bronze Star with Valor device. I'm going to explain what that means for anyone who might not be familiar, because context matters here. The Bronze Star with Valor is awarded for acts of heroism in direct combat with an enemy of the United States. It is not handed out casually. It is not a participation trophy. There is a formal ceremony, there are dress uniforms, there are senior officers, there is a guest list, and there are a limited number of seats for family members and loved ones. I received my notification letter in early spring, 2 VIP guest seats, an official ceremony at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. The date was set for a Saturday in June. I sent one seat to Aunt Diane the same afternoon I got the notification. I sat with the second seat for 3 weeks. I thought about it seriously, I did. There was still a part of me, some stubborn, exhausted little girl part of me that wanted to offer it to my mother, wanted to see if she would show up, wanted that to mean something. I think most people who come from families like mine know exactly what I'm talking about. That hope doesn't die cleanly. It sort of fades, unevenly, leaving these little pockets of ache behind. But then Amber posted a reel announcing she'd been signed to represent a mid-level skincare brand, and in the caption she thanked her parents for always believing in real success. And I read that sitting on my bunk in the barracks at 10 p.m., and I felt the last pocket of hope just quietly close. I gave the second seat to my squad leader's wife, who had become one of my closest friends. Her name is Trisha, and she had seen me at my worst and still showed up. I did not tell my family about the ceremony. The morning of the ceremony was one of those perfect early summer days that feels almost too beautiful, like the weather is being deliberately ironic. Fort Campbell was immaculate. The parade ground was set with rows of chairs, a podium flanked by flags, and a receiving line that made everything feel formal and significant in exactly the right way. Aunt Diane arrived in a navy blue dress she'd bought specifically for the occasion. She told me later she'd gone to 4 stores to find the right one because she wanted to make sure she looked worthy of the moment. I barely got through that sentence without falling apart. Trisha was beaming. She kept squeezing my arm at the reception beforehand and saying, "I cannot believe I get to be here for this." The ceremony itself, I won't pretend I remember every detail with perfect clarity, because emotions do something strange to memory. I remember the weight of the medal. I remember the commanding general's hand shaking mine and looking me in the eye and saying something about valor that I felt in my sternum. I remember scanning the crowd at one point and seeing Aunt Diane pressing both hands over her mouth, tears streaming, trying very hard to hold it together. That image will be with me until the day I die. What I did not know, and what nobody had told me, was that a regional news crew was covering the ceremony. Fort Campbell does occasional press coverage for events like this, and apparently, there was a local Veterans Affairs reporter who had been following several honorary stories for a feature segment on women in the military. She had been given access to film the ceremony and the reception afterward. After the official ceremony concluded, there was a reception in the Post's main hall. The reporter, her name was Jenna Marsh, and I liked her, immediately came up and asked if I'd be willing to do a brief interview for the segment. I said yes. Aunt Diane was standing next to me, and the reporter asked if she could include her as well, and Aunt Diane looked at me with wide eyes like I was giving her a gift. Jenna asked me about the award, about my service, about what it meant to have family there to support me, and I talked about Aunt Diane. I talked about those care packages, and the index cards, and the 6:47 a.m. birthday calls. I talked about the voicemail she left me in the hospital in Germany. I talked about the sign at the departure gate. And then, because the camera was there, and Jenna had given me an opening, I said something I had never said out loud to anyone except Aunt Diane herself. The people who show up for you when there's nothing in it for them, those are your real family. I used to think blood meant something automatic. Now I understand it's just a starting point. What you build on top of it is the part that actually counts. Aunt Diane had to look away from the camera for a moment. That segment aired 2 days later on a Tuesday evening. I didn't think much about it. Local news, small feature, not exactly a major broadcast event. The call I got on Wednesday morning was from my mother, and then another from my father, and then a text from Amber, and then another call from my mother. By noon, I had counted 22 missed calls between the three of them. By 4 in the afternoon, I was at 37. When I finally looked at my phone at the end of the workday, the number had hit 49 missed calls, along with a string of text messages that I won't read verbatim here, but the general theme was a combination of outrage that I hadn't invited them, and something that looked very much like guilt, or at least something performing guilt. My mother's voicemail, which I did eventually listen to on speakerphone with Trisha sitting across from me, lasted nearly 8 minutes. The first 4 were anger. The middle 2 were something approaching self-pity. The last 2 were what I can only describe as a very belated attempt at the word sorry from someone who has never once in her life admitted to being wrong about anything. I want to be fair, friends, because I think fairness matters even when it's hard. I believe that somewhere inside my mother's call, there might have been a real feeling, a real recognition of something lost. I'm not sure. I can't see inside her. But I know that 49 missed calls after a Bronze Star ceremony you weren't invited to, and weren't invited to for specific, documented, legitimate reasons, is not an apology. It's a reaction to consequences. And those are 2 very different things. I did not call back. I did text my mother one message. It was 3 sentences long. I told her I loved her, because I do, in the way you love something that hurt you deeply and from which you've had to build distance to survive. I told her I had made changes to my finances that were permanent. And I told her that my door was not closed forever, but it was closed for now, and that I would reach out when and if I felt ready, and I asked her to respect that. She did not respond to that text for 11 days. When she did, it was a single line. I hope you're happy. I actually am, Mom. I actually am. Here's what the following months looked like. I finished out that deployment cycle. I came home to a 2-bedroom apartment I had rented entirely with my own money. No shared accounts, no family obligations, nothing owed to anyone. I had a savings account that, for the first time, actually reflected 5 years of military service rather than 5 years of financing other people's lifestyles. I took Aunt Diane to dinner on her birthday at the nicest restaurant in her city. I bought her flowers. I toasted her in front of the other diners, and I did not care even slightly that strangers were watching. Amber's skincare brand deal, as it turned out, didn't work out the way she'd hoped. The contract wasn't renewed after 6 months, which I found out secondhand through a cousin. I don't take any satisfaction in that, genuinely. I don't. I just note it as a data point in the larger story. My parents still live in the same house. My father got another sales job. My mother still has her Facebook account where she posts about gratitude and family values on alternate Sundays. I know this because mutual relatives give me updates I sometimes wish they wouldn't. I made Sergeant First Class last fall. Aunt Diane called me at 6:47 a.m. on my birthday this past year, same as always, and I answered on the first ring like I always do. She said she'd seen a news story about women advancing in the Army and thought of me immediately. I told her she had been my first thought on the day I got the promotion notification. That's the truth. There's something I've been thinking about a lot lately, and I want to share it with you all, because I think it might be useful to someone who's in the position I was in 5 years ago, still sending the wire transfers, still apologizing into satellite phones, still telling yourself that if you just give a little more, they'll finally see you. Financial support given out of love is a gift. Financial support given out of fear of losing approval is something else entirely. It's a transaction where the other party has all the leverage and you have none, because you've attached your sense of worth to their reaction. The moment you stop the transfers, you find out very quickly what was actually there underneath. In my case, 49 missed calls told me everything I needed to know. Real family, the people who hold handmade signs at departure gates at 6 in the morning, who show up in their best navy blue dress, who leave 4-minute voicemails to hospital wards in Germany, those people don't need you to be useful to them. They just need you to exist. That distinction, friends, is everything. I'm not angry at my parents in the way I once was. Anger takes energy I'd rather spend on the people who deserve it. What I am is clear, clearer than I've been in a long time. Clear about who I am, what I've earned, who earned it with me, and who was simply along for the benefits. And if you're out there right now, in a barracks, or a bunker, or an apartment at midnight staring at your bank account, feeling that familiar knot of obligation that has nothing to do with love and everything to do with fear, I want you to hear what Aunt Diane told me in that hospital room. You cannot pay off a debt they invented to keep you paying. The transfers stop when you decide they stop. And what comes after the silence, the missed calls, the guilt trip voicemails, that's not punishment. That's information. Let it tell you what you need to know. I have my medal. I have my promotion. I have my savings account. I have Aunt Diane's phone number in my favorites and a reservation for her birthday dinner already booked for next year. I have everything that matters. And my phone screen shows 0 missed calls from the people who once needed 49 tries to remember I existed.